ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਜੀ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ, ਸਾਡੇ ਸੁਣਨ ਵਾਲਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ, ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਹੋਏ ਆ ਕਾਫੀ ਟਾਈਮ ਤੋਂ। ਮੈਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੀ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕੀਤੇ ਆ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਹੋਏ ਆ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਵੀਡੀਓਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਐਪਰੀਸ਼ੀਏਟ ਵੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਕਮੈਂਟਸ ਵੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ। ਸੋ ਇਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ। ਸੋ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਵੀਡੀਓ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਸਾਡਾ ਮਕਸਦ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ ਹਰ ਵਰਗ ਦੇ, ਹਰ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਇੰਸਪੀਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਸਾਡੇ ਲਈ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਉਣਾ ਹੈ। ਉਸੇ ਲੜੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਹਨ ਫ੍ਰਾਂਸਿਸ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹਨ ਉਹ ਰਿਟਾਇਰਡ ਕਾਉਂਸਲਰ ਹਨ ਔਰ ਕੁੰਡਲਿਨੀ ਯੋਗਾ ਟੀਚਰ ਹਨ, ਗੁਰੂ ਰਾਮਦਾਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਜੈਕਟ ਵੀ ਚਲਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਵਲੰਟਰੀ ਵਰਕ ਕੀਤੇ ਹਨ ਔਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਮੇਨ ਮਕਸਦ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹਿਊਮੈਨਿਟੀ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਨਾ ਹੈ। ਤੇ ਇਹ ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਸ ਲਈ ਜੁੜੇ ਹਨ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਸਾਡੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਸੁਣ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਹੋਈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਉਸੇ ਰਸਤੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਤੁਰੇ ਹਾਂ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਇਹ ਕੰਮ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ। ਸੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟਿਵ ਰਾਈਟਿੰਗ ਸਟੱਡੀ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕ੍ਰਿਸਚੀਅਨਟੀ ਦਾ ਨਾਮ ਸੀਗਾ ਫ੍ਰਾਂਸਿਸ, ਪਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਪਿਰਿਚੁਅਲ ਨਾਮ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਫਤਿਹ ਵੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਨਾਮ ਹੈਗਾ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਪੂਰਾ ਨਾਮ ਫਤਿਹ ਫ੍ਰਾਂਸਿਸ ਬੀਡਲ ਆਪਣੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਨ। ਸੋ ਅੱਜ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਖਿਲਾ ਕੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਤੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਮਾਣ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਚਾਹੂੰਗੀ ਕਿ ਮੇਰੀ ਕੋ-ਹੋਸਟ ਅਮਰ ਅੱਜ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੰਟਰੋਡਿਊਸ ਕਰਾਏ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤਾ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਕੌਰ ਸੰਧੂ। ਸੋ ਪਲੀਜ਼ ਅਮਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ
ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ।
ਸਾਡੇ ਸਕੂਲ
ਮੇਰਾ ਨਾਮ ਹੈਗਾ Beadle from seektherapy.com। ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ Francis Fateh and we'll be asking him some questions. So welcome Fateh, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're welcome. So it'd be really nice to hear from you a little about your journey and what motivated you first of all to get into therapy. You was a psychodynamic counsellor, wasn't you?
So it's, in a lot of ways, it's a long story. So you'll have to sort of nudge me if I start waffling on. But I guess I grew up I have lovely parents, very loving parents. In a lot of ways, a very easy, sheltered childhood. But because of things that happened when I was very, very young, which I didn't remember until relatively recently, I've carried this sort of inner pain for a long, long time and not understood what it was or where it was coming from or why it was so hard to settle at anything, why I found even very simple things in life very difficult. So I think partly because of that, and I think partly because of a natural interest in that side of things anyway, I was always interested in the big questions. You know, what is the meaning of life? Does God exist? How can I be happy and fulfilled? Or as a friend of mine sort of sums it up, she said, well, your life has been a lifelong search for solving the problem of being in pain. And I think in a lot of ways that's true. And so, you know, when I was even at primary school, I was absolutely fascinated by my mum's Christianity. She was an evangelical Christian, and I used to run around in the playground breaking up fights and trying to encourage people to go to Sunday school and all of that kind of thing. But it was as I got older, the way in which I engaged with my spiritual life in that way didn't sustain me through the challenges that I was having. And I won't go into all the various things that I tried and you know, I tried other kinds of spirituality and things as well. And I got to a phase when I was in my mid-20s, when I was an atheist and I had decided that God didn't exist, I decided that Christ didn't exist, I decided that when we died, that was it. but the values that I'd grown up with about wanting to make the world a better place, about believing in the importance of love and kindness and helping other people were in my bones, really. So, you know, I carried on doing, sorry, I hope you couldn't hear that. That's my computer beeping messages at me. So I sort of carried on trying, you know, working in the voluntary sector, and I ended up working with homeless people. And you would see the same, if you stayed in the homeless field long enough, in the resettlement field long enough, you'd see the same faces sort of coming around, and you'd help them into housing, and you'd help them, you know, dry out, or you'd help them get control of their addictions or whatever the issues were that seemed to be driving them. And then you'd think that you'd launch them successfully back into the community, and you see them round again. You see the same faces round again a year or a few years later. And it dawned on me then that there was just no point helping with the outer world if you couldn't help people with their inner world. And that coincided with the same sort of discovery in my own life, that I needed, you know, and still need, and probably will always need, to keep doing that inner work. So that really brought me into the space of being fascinated by therapy, by counselling. And so I got into, I first of all did a person-centered counselling course, and then after that I studied psychodynamic counselling for 3 years, and that's what I ended up qualifying in. My computer's telling me the internet is unstable. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you. You're doing good. You're doing good.
Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. That's great. Fateh, that's great. So it'd be good to now move on to, do you feel that your experiences from what you've just shared have actually shaped who you are today? So that many years later, you've been on a journey. After, obviously, psychodynamic counselling, you've done some more work with the Guru Ram Dass project as well, haven't you? And you trained as a Kundalini teacher?
Yes. So the kind of the inner world, I mean, when you start looking at your emotional life and the things that drive your emotional life, and the stuff you haven't let go of, and the projections you project onto your relationship and onto the world around you, in the ways in which you recreate the same dynamics and patterns again and again and again, yada, 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 yada. Once you've swum around in that fishbowl for a while, you realize that the fishbowl has an up and a down to it. So not only is there the sort of emotional and mental life, there's the very tangible physical life. There's the body, and actually what you do with the body matters. And the flip side of the going down is the going up. And then you realize that there is for want of a better way of putting it, there's a bigger space, which isn't a psychological space. It's a bigger space than the psychological space, which is, you know, the realm of the gods or divinity or higher consciousness or whatever way you want to try and understand that. And I was literally I liked working part-time and studying part-time. I really like that as a work-life balance, because I'm interested in things. So, but I also like to work. So I actually prefer working part-time and studying part-time to doing either full-time, as a general rule of thumb. And I was looking around for something else to train in, and I just happened to be in a yoga class, and I just had an experience. I mean, and you know, it wasn't. I don't want to over egg it. You know, it's not like I was suddenly had an enlightenment type experience. It's not like I suddenly met God or something like that. But there was an opening of some kind. There was an experience of something more than my personality, and that happened through the way in which I was working the body. And I think it's partly because of the exercises that I was doing, because it was a Kundalini Yoga class, but I think it's also the spirit in which the class was held. I don't think it was just about the physical practices. I think it was the spirit in which the class was held helped me to find that experience within myself. And then from that moment onwards, it was, it had to be yoga. it had to be yoga, both because of the physicality and the spirituality, that it combined the two, exploring the two directions simultaneously. And my relationship to my body did change very much during that time, as well as my relationship to God and the world around me.
So how do you feel that interested you to do something further in Kundalini Yoga? So how did that develop you as a person, your practice as a psychodynamic counselor? Do you feel it was hand in hand?
Well, I struggle. I mean, integration is something that has been a lifelong journey for me. So in those early years, I really struggled to integrate the atheist emotional therapy that I'd done with the very theist Kundalini yoga practice that I had. So I think it's very possible to integrate the two, but I found that quite challenging. And the way in which I coped with it was to become less and less interested in therapy and more interested in simply the yoga and meditation. And I don't think that's the right or wrong approach. That was my way of coping with that particular knife edge, as it were. But I really loved the use of yoga and meditation in a therapeutic space. And by that, I don't mean replacing emotional therapy with it, but there is something so empowering about finding the wholesomeness within yourself, so that you're not dependent on somebody standing in for the perfect parent or the perfect mother in the therapy room and giving you a corrective experience. You're not dependent upon anybody else except yourself and God. And depending on which way you look at it, that it's the God part. Whether you're talking God part within yourself or the God part outside of yourself doesn't matter. But it's the finding that absolute unspoilt wholesomeness, which is so amazingly therapeutic, and not needing an intermediary to there's nothing else no one else outside of you that you have to rely on for that relationship. And that's even if you only give people a taste of it, which is why I love things like Kundalini Yoga for addiction. And addiction was one of my problems. Is I had for many years I had a drink problem. Even if you just give people an experience of it of that feeling well within themselves for a few hours, that has like a ripple of effect. They don't have to even consciously take up spirituality as a way of life, but that has a ripple effect out from that moment and affects the decisions that they make for the next, for sake of argument, 2 or 3 hours. But those decisions then affect their life for the next however many hours, because for those 2 or 3 hours they've not run down the off license and got pissed, or they've not reached for the next joint or whatever it is. They've maybe gone out and cooked themselves a proper meal, or got in contact with a friend, or contacted someone that they love and they've lost touch with, or it creates a momentum in the other way. And that's kind of how I fell in love with the Guru Ramdas project, was just that you help it through a very profound way, which allows the spiritual to be consciously present. You create the ripple that moves people in a positive direction. And because the spirituality is consciously present, people can take it or leave it. People don't have to run with it, but if they have the inclination to run with it, they don't sort of find it in between the gaps. And it's unlike in the therapy room where it might be present in an unconscious way. It's very much present in a conscious way. So it's not, anyway, it's much easier for people to reach for it if they are touched in that way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That is so good. That's very motivating, because obviously addictions are a big thing, as you've said.
Yeah.
The thing that you spoke about there was obviously religion, and being an atheist, coming from a very religious family, and as a child you've kind of reflected on how you were raised, and even a little bit about the playground there. You gave us quite a good image of a child who actually is trying to create peace and keep sanity in the world, and then obviously following on. So there's been a path of, like you said, trying to heal and find yourself and integrate within something. So it's quite interesting how Kundalini Yoga has come to that, you know, to come to a rescue place for you, where you are able to actually connect.
And I think once I got to a place of being more well, Kundalini Yoga wasn't where I wanted to sit for the rest of my life. So for me, it was a transitional space into something else, which is neither right nor wrong. But I think it is particularly good as a crisis tool, because it apart from the fact that you can change the way that you feel within about 40 minutes. Because it is so rooted in the body and what you do with the body. It's very accessible, because you don't have to sit still, and you don't have to take in difficult philosophy, and you don't have to be able to sit and experience yourself exactly as you are, and you just have to move.
That's so beautiful.
You just have to move.
Very nice, beautiful.
So now, if we just take you into your work at obviously Anglian Ruskin University, and then I know I've followed you as well. I've seen some of your Buddhist meditations when you do them. They're just so amazing, and it's very different to Kundalini Yoga, but it is another way of mindfulness and meditation, isn't it? Tell us a little bit about that.
So I didn't hear the question properly, because I've got a sound that it was quite distorted. You were asking about Anglo Ruskin University and Buddhism.
Yeah. So let me ask you again. So Fateh, you've also worked at Anglian Ruskin University, and you also did some meditation work there, didn't you? So please tell us a little bit about that, because that's also another interesting journey that we'd love to hear about.
So whilst I was at Anglo Ruskin University, so I was at it's sort of ironic sometimes how life works out. So after I decided that yoga was the most important cornerstone in my life, or yoga and meditation, the spiritual path, rather than the therapeutic path, I then almost by chance landed what would have been my absolute dream job before I discovered Kundalini Yoga, which was to work with students at a university as a therapist. And although at that point I was more interested in yoga than therapy, I absolutely loved working at Anglo Ruskin University, or at least the first couple of years I absolutely loved. I used to bounce up the stairs on a Monday morning every bit as eagerly as I bounced down them on a Friday evening, because I just used to find it very rewarding, and I enjoyed the therapy work, and it was I had the right amount of client load, so I didn't feel overburdened. I just felt stimulated. And during that period, there was a request came into the university to help a visiting Buddhist teacher. So this was somebody who wanted to visit Cambridge and wanted to give a talk, and wanted somebody living in Cambridge to help organise that from the Cambridge side. Because I taught some Kundalini Yoga and some meditation at the university, and people knew that was a passion of mine, my name got put forward. So I ended up organising a talk for a Buddhist teacher that I'd never heard of and never met, from a school that I'd never heard of before. And he was a Chinese Buddhist master who I much later discovered was the lineage holder of not one but two different lineages, one of which was an esoteric lineage, which is like it's a Vajrayana lineage. It's like the Tibetan Buddhism. It's like the Tibetan schools, but it's a Chinese version of. And the other one was a Zen lineage. So anyway, I ended up meeting this person. He ended up coming around to my house and eating with me and a couple of friends. And then we went to this venue, and he gave a talk. And I was profoundly impressed by him. And I could not tell you what it was that impressed me, because yes, he said very wise things, but at that point I'd been off to India and done silent retreats with if I say it, supposedly enlightened teachers, I don't mean that what I mean by the supposedly is I have no way of really knowing from my ignorant perspective. All I can say is they were way beyond where I've reached. But I'd met some very impressive people before. But there was something about the ordinariness and the groundedness, the solidity. I absolutely trusted him. I didn't even. I mean, I liked the meditations, but it wasn't that I liked them more than Kundalini meditations or other kinds of meditations that I'd tried. In fact, I tried studying with a Shiva yoga teacher who was also supposedly enlightened, and I preferred his meditations, but I didn't trust him. So I sort of drifted away from him because I just didn't trust him. Whereas there was something about Master Detshin Jiren that was utterly trustworthy. I would have tried, and it's the same. In a strange way, it's the same criteria which I got married. I love my wife, but I love lots of people in my life. But I wanted to build a life with her because I loved her and I really trusted her. I absolutely trusted her integrity completely, and it was the same with my Buddhist master. I absolutely trusted him completely, and I ended up a few years later going and doing a 3-month retreat in China. So we stayed in a monastery in China. And I took refuge in the Shaolin Temple. It was not where we were staying. We visited the Shaolin Temple and we went into whatever the inner sanctuary is called, and I can't remember now, within where the tourists can't go. And those of us who were taking refuge with him took refuge with him. And I've stayed. Obviously, I've stayed connected to that school ever since. So that was around 2010, I think it was. I took refuge. Although I've since also become very interested in anthroposophy, which is an esoteric Christian school. But it's I love. There are lots of things about Buddhism that I love. There's lots of things about Sikhism that I love. Lots of things about Hinduism that I love. I mean, it's not. I struggle to place myself in one religion over another. I just have teachers who wear particular kinds of robes or particular spaces, and.
Okay, that's really beautiful. You've explained that. Really, you've given us quite a nice story there. A really good insight to how you are connected to your beliefs and that wholesome of your inner world. That's really beautiful, profound. Can I just ask then how you came into the Guru Ram Dass project, and you became obviously a manager there as well, and you've obviously work with you there, so thank you.
I mean, I knew about the Guru Ram Dass project many years, almost as well when I was doing my first year of Kundalini Yoga Teacher training, and the philosophy that seemed to come with the teacher training was that because it was, and it is, an amazing set of teachings and incredibly valuable, and because we live in a society that values things through money, there was a high cost associated with the trainings. And I didn't have a problem with that. I think you can make a very good, like lots of things in life, you can make a great argument for charging through the nose for it, and you can make a great argument for not charging a penny for it. And I don't think it's right or wrong. It's just that you can just take different stances with lots of things, and that's one of them. But it always troubled me as somebody who at various points in my life have needed help but not had money, and worked with people who needed help and didn't have money, that Kundalini Yoga wasn't available for people who couldn't pay for it. And that I found that profoundly troubling. And then I was so relieved when someone told me about the Guru Ram Dass project, which amongst other things, went off and taught people who were recovering from addictions or had mental health problems or whatever. And there was not they paid what they could afford, and if that was nothing, that was nothing. So that was such a relief, and I was sort of pretty much a lifelong supporter from that moment. So I used to I didn't used to be involved directly, but they were my charity of choice in terms of who I used to regularly donate to. And then many years later, it's a long story. I don't know if it's worth telling the longer story. After my father died, and in some ways it was a way of healing my relationship with the father figure a little bit. My father was lovely, so I'm not trying to make out that he was a bad person, but we all have things that we need to heal. And I'd always felt, I had this sort of chip on my shoulder that I wasn't good enough, and because I hadn't been interested in the worldly achievement kind of direction that my parents had wanted me to go in, and I still was working through stuff around that, and I just basically decided to do nothing. I decided to do nothing, and I was going to sit and I was going to wait until my heart just went, yes, I really want to do that. And I just, wasn't going to work. I wasn't going to do anything. I was going to find that. It was a very idealistic, slightly naive way of experiment. That I wanted to find the 100% yes. And I actually think that would have worked if I'd had the discipline to stay with it and not just drift off into Facebook and novels and nice little trips to the coffee shop and going for walks and things, and generally dissipating the focus. And then I was just and I realized after 6 months or 8 months or something, I was in a position where the waiting for the magic to happen was no longer working. It was now not something that was a positive direction in my life. It was a negative direction in my life. So I needed to start moving the other way. And I didn't know what to do. Because I didn't really feel that enthused by anything, and I can't remember. I saw an advert that Kundalini Yoga Teachers wanted for an addiction class in Blenheim, around the corner from me, and I just thought, oh, okay, well, I can remember loving yoga, and I can remember how enormously, profoundly healing the discovery has been in my life. So I ended up dusting off my yoga books, because by then I had a completely different practice, and I had a daily practice, but it just wasn't yoga anymore. It wasn't Kundalini yoga anymore. And going off and teaching, and it was an incredibly rewarding experience. I absolutely loved it. There were never huge numbers of people in the room, but you could see the difference at the end of the class from the beginning of the class. And it sort of reignited my love of the sort of mission state, the mission of Guru Ram Dass project, or at least that side of the mission of Guru Ram Dass project, which was to take Kundalini yoga to people who were most in need. And it was a very, in some ways it was a weakness not to be a Kundalini yogi at that point in my life, but to try and work for a Kundalini yoga charity. But in other ways, it was a strength, because I was completely unattached to Kundalini yoga. I was the opposite of the sort of evangelical, this is the best way and the only way, and you should do it this way kind of approach. Maybe I should say that not all evangelists are quite like that, but that was the kind of evangelism that I grew up with. That this is the best way and the only way. So I was so far away from that it was very easy to go in and just say, well, this really works. There are other ways of doing it, but this really works, and it's very practical. For about 5 or 6 years, I absolutely loved. I didn't only love because it was very challenging, but I moved from teaching the class to when the vacancy came up for a project manager. I ended up applying for that. Even though in a lot of ways I'm a very disorganized person, so in some ways being a manager didn't suit me. But I could do the networking, and I could do the volunteer support and recruitment, and I could do the client work, and I could, there were a lot of things that I could do very well, and there were things I really wasn't very good at. So it was a bit of a maybe not a perfect fit, but an interesting fit. So I ended up being the person who set up classes for other people to teach, rather than the person teaching the classes. And I still think the Guru Ram Dass, even though it's not the style of meditational yoga that I practice in my daily life, I still think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to share, particularly for people who are in crisis. But it's not what I'm doing now. I'm now on sabbatical.
Doing now, Fateh?
So it's arguably the first sort of full-time thing that I've ever done in my life where there hasn't been a little angel or a little gremlin on my shoulder saying, you should do this because it's the right thing to do, or it's the world-saving thing to do, or it's it's what God would want you to do. I've had all of these kind of one should do, not in any way wanting to, obviously the right thing is important and God is important, all of those kind of things. But there was so much should in my decision making that this was the first thing that I just did because I wanted to do it. I just really wanted to do it. So I'm doing an MA in creative writing, and the focus of the MA is actually on writing a novel. So although I like poetry and other forms of writing, that's not what we're doing. We're just looking purely at writing a novel. So we all of us on the course had to come into the course with an idea for a novel, and then the course, the whole of the course was based around how you write that novel. Planning it out, writing the scenes, developing the characters, all of that kind of thing. And I've just absolutely loved it. I don't think I've ever enjoyed a full-time occupation in the way that I enjoy being on the MA. What I'm finding is that although I've not gone in there with any kind of save the world kind of intention. Of course, all of the work, the hard work done in the therapy room and the yoga mat and the going to listen to wise and wonderful teachers. I mean, all of that is sitting in the back somewhere when I'm writing the stories and developing the characters. And the book is very much, or I want it very much to be an exploration of what it means to be human. I mean, the fundamental questions in my life is, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be alive? How can I make it stop hurting? Those are the sort of questions that have driven my life, and those are the sort of questions that my various fictional characters have to grapple with one way or another.
Well, that's beautiful. That's really nice. So what do you